For decades, the Mongols were unstoppable, an army that destroyed cities, broke kingdoms, and crushed everything in its path. By 1258, they had captured Baghdad, ending the Abbasid Caliphate and leaving the Islamic world in shock. Now their commander, Hulagu Khan, was moving west again. Syria had fallen, Damascus had surrendered, and the Mongol banners stood at the border of Egypt, the last major power still standing. But Egypt's ruler, Sultan Qutuz, refused to bow. His army, the Mamluks, were disciplined soldiers, men who had once been slaves, now the defenders of Islam. When Hulagu's general Kitbuka marched south, Qutuz decided to face him directly. The two forces met in the valley of Ain Jalut, a battle that would decide whether the Mongols could ever be stopped. To really get the scale of what happened at Ain Jalut, you have to understand the pure terror the Mongols inspired. This wasn't just another army, it was a continental war machine. Their entire society was built for one purpose: war. A Mongol child learned to ride a horse at the age of 3. He could hunt with a bow before he could properly walk. Their military was brilliantly organized around a decimal system. Units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, called a tumen. This strict structure meant orders could fly across a chaotic battlefield with terrifying speed. Their main weapon was the composite bow, a marvel of engineering made of wood, sinew, and horn that could punch arrows through armor at incredible distances. Mongol armies were almost all cavalry, giving them a speed that no settled empire could dream of matching. They could cover 100 miles in a single day, living off the land and their horses' milk, appearing out of thin air to lay waste to their enemies. But maybe their greatest weapon wasn't a weapon at all. It was fear. Before the main army even showed up, spies would spread tales of their ferocity. Their policy was brutally simple: submit and live, or resist and be erased. Not just your army, not just your king. Everyone. When they sacked a city, they did it with an industrial efficiency, often leaving behind pyramids of skulls as a little message for the next town in their path. This was the force that Hulagu Khan, Genghis's grandson, unleashed on the Middle East. His brother, the great Khan Monkey, had given him one job: subdue Western Asia. First, he crushed the legendary assassins in their mountain forts. Then, in 1258, he arrived at the walls of Baghdad, the 500-year-old capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. He demanded surrender. The Caliph refused. The sack that followed was one of the most devastating events in Islamic history. Libraries, hospitals, palaces, all razed to the ground. The Caliph himself was rolled up in a carpet and trampled to death by horses, a special honor to avoid spilling royal blood on the ground. After Baghdad, the wave just kept rolling. Hulagu's army swept through Syria, taking Aleppo and Damascus. The Mongol Empire now touched the very border of Egypt. In early 1260, Hulagu sent messengers to Cairo with a letter for the Mamluk Sultan, Qutuz. It was dripping with contempt. "You have heard how we have conquered a vast empire and have purified the earth of its disorders. It is for you to fly and for us to pursue. But what road will you fly by? Our horses are swift, our arrows sharp, our swords like thunderbolts, our hearts as hard as the mountains, our soldiers as numerous as the sand. Fortresses will not detain us. Your prayers to God will not avail against us." For any other ruler, this was the time to surrender. But Sultan Qutuz wasn't any other ruler, and his army was unlike any other in the world. The Mamluks are a total paradox. The word Mamluk literally means one who is owned, or slave, and yet they were the absolute masters of Egypt. For centuries, Islamic rulers had a unique practice of buying young boys from the steppes of Eurasia. mostly Kipchak Turks. These weren't your typical slaves. They were chosen for their toughness and skill in battle. Brought to Cairo, they were completely cut off from their old lives. They converted to Islam and were thrown into one of the most intense military training programs on earth. They lived together in the barracks of the Cairo citadel, their loyalty sworn not to a family or tribe, but to their masters and, most importantly, to each other. They drilled relentlessly in horsemanship, sword fighting, and, crucially, shooting a bow from horseback. When they finally graduated, they were granted their freedom, but remained part of this elite warrior brotherhood. By the mid-13th century, they had become so powerful, they just took over. In 1250, they kicked out the old dynasty and started their own sultanate. They were, in effect, a military junta, a state run by soldiers, for soldiers. And this is what made them the perfect enemy for the Mongols. The Mamluks were basically a mirror image of them. Many were the same Turkic people who had been absorbed into the Mongol horde. They were master horsemen who grew up on the steppes. They even used the same primary weapon, the composite bow. But there were a few key differences. Mamluk cavalry tended to be more heavily armored, making them better in a brutal, close-quarters fight. And while the Mongols fought for conquest, the Mamluks of 1260 were fighting for their very existence. They were the last major Islamic power still standing. There was nowhere left to run. Their leader was Sultan Saif al-Din Qutuz. His own life story tells you everything you need to know about the era. He was born a prince, but was captured by the Mongols as a kid and sold into slavery, eventually rising through the Mamluk ranks in Egypt. He knew the Mongols. He'd seen their destruction up close. So when Hulagu's threatening letter arrived, Qutuz gave a response that was loud, clear, and absolutely terrifying. He had the Mongol envoys executed, their bodies chopped in half, and their heads put on display at the main gate of Cairo. It was the ultimate insult. There would be no talks, no surrender. This was going to be a war to the death. To lead his vanguard, Qutuz needed his best commander, and that was a man named Baibars. Baibars was brilliant, charismatic, ruthless, and incredibly ambitious. Just like Qutuz, he was a Kipchak Turk who'd been sold into slavery. He was already a war hero, famous for fighting the Crusaders, and his troops adored him. He and Qutuz were rivals, for sure, but they were now united against a threat that could wipe them all out. Baibars also happened to know the lands of Syria and Palestine like the back of his hand, and that knowledge was about to become very, very important. Just as this epic showdown seemed about to happen, fate stepped in. News arrived from the Mongol heartland. The great Khan Mongol was dead. According to Mongol law, all princes of the royal line had to return to the capital to elect a new leader. This was always a messy, often violent process, and Hulagu couldn't risk being left out while his cousins and brothers jockeyed for the throne. He made a fateful choice. He took the main body of his massive army, maybe as many as 100,000 men, and started the long ride back east. But he didn't give up on conquering Egypt. He left behind a smaller, but still deadly, occupation force of around 10,000 to 20,000 soldiers. He put this army under the command of his most trusted general, Kitbuka Noyan. Kitbuka was a veteran commander, a Nestorian Christian, and a warrior with absolute confidence in his Mongol troops, who had literally never lost a major battle. Thinking he had this in the bag, Kitbuka continued his push south. When Sultan Qutuz heard that Hulagu had left, he seized the moment. Instead of waiting for the Mongols to invade Egypt, he made a bold move. He would march his army north and meet them head-on in Palestine. This was a huge gamble. He was marching his entire force into enemy territory, but the numbers were now on his side. With both armies estimated at around 15,000 to 20,000 men, this would be a fair fight. For the first time ever, the Mongols wouldn't have their usual overwhelming numbers. The Mamluk army marched out of Cairo in the summer of 1260. In a slick bit of diplomacy, Qutuz even got safe passage through the Crusader kingdom of Akkara. The Crusaders, who were also terrified of the Mongols, figured the Mamluks were the lesser of two evils and let them pass and resupply. The stage was now set. Kitbuka, hearing that the Mamluks were coming, gathered his forces to meet them. The two armies would finally collide near a spring in the Jezreel Valley. The Arabic name for this place was Ain Jalut, or Goliath Spring. According to legend, it was the very spot where David had slain Goliath. On September 3rd, 1260, another battle of giants was about to begin. The first brilliant move the Mamluks made was the battlefield itself. Ain Jalut wasn't a wide-open plain where Mongol cavalry could run circles around their enemy. It was a relatively tight valley, hemmed in by hills and trees, perfect for an ambush. Baibars, who knew the area well, had picked the perfect spot. The Mamluk plan, cooked up by Baibars and Qutuz, was as simple as it was genius. They were going to beat the Mongols with their own favorite trick. Qutuz would hide the bulk of the Mamluk army, their elite heavy cavalry, in the wooded hills overlooking the valley. Meanwhile, Baibars would take a smaller force of a few thousand men down into the valley to meet the Mongols. His job was to fight them, annoy them, and then, at just the right moment, run away. As the sun came up on September 3rd, it was at the Mamluks' backs, shining right into the eyes of the advancing Mongols. When Kitbuka saw only Baibars' small force, he must have felt pretty confident. The first to charge were the Mongols and their allies. Baibars met them head-on. For hours, a swirling, chaotic battle raged. Baibars used classic hit-and-run tactics, striking and falling back, over and over, all designed to frustrate the Mongols and bait their proud, aggressive commander. Kitbuka just wasn't used to this kind of resistance from what he thought was an inferior army. Goaded by Baibars' constant harassment, he made the exact mistake the Mamluks were counting on. On a signal, Baibars' force broke. They turned and fled in what looked like a total panic, running up the valley toward the very hills where the main Mamluk army was hiding. This was the feigned retreat, the Mongol signature move. It takes incredible discipline to pull off, to make a retreat look real enough to be chased, but organized enough that it doesn't turn into a real disaster. Baibars, coming from the same warrior culture, knew exactly how to sell it. Kitbuka bought it completely, hook, line, and sinker. Believing the enemy was broken, he ordered his entire army to charge forward and finish them off. His forces poured into the valley, chasing Baibars, leaving the open ground behind and entering the Mamluk killing zone. Once the Mongol army was deep inside the trap, Qutuz gave the signal. From the hills on three sides, the main Mamluk army exploded out of its hiding places. Thousands of heavy horsemen crashed into the Mongol flanks as a storm of arrows rained down on the now surrounded army. The shock must have been unbelievable. One minute they were the hunters, the next they were trapped. But these were Mongol veterans. They didn't break easily. They absorbed the hit and started to furiously fight their way out. Kitbuka, a true warrior, rallied his men and launched a counterattack so ferocious it actually broke the Mamluk left wing. For a terrifying second, it looked like the Mongols might just turn the tables. This was the crisis point. The Mamluk line was buckling. Seeing his army about to collapse, Sultan Qutuz did something incredible. He tore off his helmet so all his men could see his face and screamed a rallying cry that echoed across the valley. Wa Islama! Oh, for Islam. Then he personally led his own guards, in a desperate charge straight into the thick of the fighting. And that was it. That was the moment everything changed. Inspired by their sultan's insane bravery, the Mamluk line held, pushed back, and shattered the Mongol counterattack. Surrounded, exhausted, and now leaderless after Kitbuka was killed in the chaos, the Mongol army finally fell apart. The Battle of Ain Jalut was over. The victory was total. The myth of Mongol invincibility was broken, drowned at the spring of Goliath. For the very first time, a Mongol army had been wiped out in a major battle and was unable to come back to avenge the loss. Qutuz rode into Damascus as a hero 5 days later, and within a month, all of Syria was cleared of Mongol forces. The westward expansion of the Mongol Empire had been stopped dead in its tracks. They would try to invade Syria again over the years, but they would never again be a serious threat to Egypt. Ain Jalut had drawn a line in the sand. The victory cemented the Mamluk Sultanate as the dominant power in the Middle East for the next 250 years and ensured the survival of Islamic culture in Cairo, which became the heart of the Arab world after Baghdad's destruction. But the story has one last dark, ironic twist. The two men who planned the victory, Qutuz and Baibars, didn't enjoy their success together. On the triumphant journey back to Cairo, Qutuz was assassinated in a plot led by the ever-ambitious Baibars. Baibars was then proclaimed the new sultan, a job he held for 17 years, making the Mamluks even stronger. The Battle of Ain Jalut is one of those hinge moments in history. It was a victory of clever strategy over brute force. It proved that the unstoppable could, in fact, be stopped. It was the day a small army of slave soldiers, led by a brilliant general, used their enemy's favorite trick against them to save their world, and in doing so, helped shape ours. The legacy of Ain Jalut isn't just about one battle. It's a brutal reminder that no empire is forever, and no force is truly unstoppable. It's a story of how knowing your enemy, using the terrain to your advantage, and showing incredible courage when it matters most can overcome even the most terrifying odds. It was the day the storm finally broke.